Hi. Over the last few weeks, we've looked at a few incidents in the life and ministry of Jesus from the point of view of those that witnessed it at the time. Mainly the disciples, but we looked at some others. And there are many other incidents we could have looked at. The healing of the 10 lepers, for instance, the water into wine incident, or his many interactions with people with demons, particularly Mary Magdalene, who became a prominent figure after Jesus dealt with the many issues. But before we leave the subject, I couldn't leave it without looking at the 4 days that cover the evening of Maundy Thursday through Easter Sunday morning. Let's look at some of the things that they went through in a slightly longer version of what we've been doing so far before we finish. I wonder what it would have been like to share what we now call the Last Supper with Jesus. And we're taking all these readings from Matthew's account, although they're virtually all covered in the other Gospels. And in Matthew 26, verse 20, going forward, we read the story of the Last Supper, and for many of us that's well known, and I'm not about to read it for the sake of time. But what did the disciples feel when Jesus said things like the bread and wine and body and blood? What was that all about? That must have been really confusing. As far as they were concerned, they'd come to celebrate Pentecost, something they would have probably done dozens of times in the past, and a few of those probably in the same company they were in now. Only later would they understand the significance of it all. Who was going to betray him? Probably an unthinkable thought to them. And yet he was saying all these things. What was going through their head at that time? And then he said, in verse 31, they will all forsake him. It must have felt like a slap in the face after they'd seemingly been so loyal to him for the last 3 years. And what about Peter? In this situation, it suggested that he was made of stronger stuff. Even if everyone falls away, I never will, were his last brave but poignant words. To then be picked out for a special mention that he would deny Jesus before the rooster crowed to herald the next day. He would learn quickly that he couldn't rely on his own strength, and neither can we. And then what about in the Garden of Gethsemane? An account of the darkest time for Jesus, knowing what was to come and being led down by his friends, who couldn't even stay awake with him for a few hours or so, culminating in that fateful attention from Judas when he brings all the people to arrest him and betraying him. And even then, Jesus shows compassion to his enemies. After one of the disciples cuts off the ear of one of the soldiers, we're told in another gospel that was Peter, and that doesn't really come as a surprise, does it? Then the second part of verse 56 tells us that all the disciples deserted him and fled. Not one of them stayed, just as he predicted a few hours before in that upper room. And then we move on to a few hours later, the crucifixion of Jesus. And that's in, amongst others, Matthew 27, verse 27 to 55. Between the evening we've just looked at and the account of Jesus' death, there is a whole litany of false accusations, mock trials, and the account of Jesus' second prophecy of the previous evening being fulfilled, as Peter denies him 3 times. How did Peter feel? How would you feel in his position? It must have felt like there was no way back for poor Peter. But we know there was. And there is enough for us through God's grace. There's always a way back. So Jesus is left alone to hang there and die. Matthew tells us that there were many women there who followed him. John records that he, alone of all the disciples, was there with them. And he receives a special instruction from Jesus. How did Jesus' disciples feel at this point, at the point of Jesus hanging on the cross? Clearly, with the exception of John, they had to be told later what had happened. They weren't near enough to know. How did the women feel? It's interesting, isn't it, that in those days women were looked down upon, they were nothing. Even in our own society until recently, women didn't even get the vote. Yet who was there? Who was there watching, waiting, weeping? And perhaps even more importantly, more poignantly, how did his mother feel watching her son die? How much did this special woman know and understand what would happen before it did? How gut-wrenching was it for her? What a special lady Mary was. And then we skip on. We know that Jesus' body was taken down, and Nicodemus, a man we looked at earlier on, one of the leaders of the Jews, one of the Pharisees, along with the man who owned the tomb, Joseph, came and took Jesus' body and took him to the tomb. And then that was 3 o'clock when Jesus died on the Friday, just before the Sabbath started. And the Sabbath went Saturday. Then he came to Sunday morning. And the stories vary in the Gospels about quite what happened there. But the bottom line is this. Despite being killed, despite a massive stone being placed over the tomb, despite guards being posted, he was alive. He would later appear many times to his disciples and others before ascending to heaven. Nothing could hold him down. He was victorious over death, the price of sin, the world's hatred, and all the things that people fear. The disciples understood much more in the light of these events and what would happen a few weeks later at Pentecost. They knew forgiveness now, particularly Peter, given what had happened, who was singled out for special recognition by Jesus following his denial. They were privileged to see such things, but most of them ended up dying a martyr's death. They counted all suffering for him as acceptable because he is Lord. They saw some tremendous things. They heard some tremendous teachings. And at least 4 of them, as recorded in the Gospels, took the time to record it. Although in Luke's case, he wasn't actually with them originally, but it's believed that Peter gave him most of his information. And they walked with him for approximately 3 years. They heard things, they saw things. And then finally, they saw him rose. Death couldn't hold him because Jesus is Lord. Many years ago, I found Jesus as my Lord, over 50 years now. And I don't regret it's not always been easy. I've not been called to martyrdom like some of the disciples did. And frankly, I wouldn't want to, but who knows? But Jesus is Lord and he can change lives. He changed mine. He changed the lives of the disciples and almost everyone he came into contact with. So I ask you today, as we finish this series, is he your Lord? God bless you.